On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're talking the New York Giants roster, how the battles are taking shape, where the weaknesses still exist, and a whole lot more. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. Find our written work over at si.com/NFL/Giants. And of course, a welcome on in to our Blue Crew community members, our newcomers, our everydayers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, you know him, you love him, you asked for him. Again, he's here, Coach Gene Clemons of Giants on si.com. And I got to get used to that branding, Gene. We changed our branding. But Gene, welcome on into the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely more of a mouthful, right? More of a mouthful to say.
Just got to get used to it. But they just rebranded it. We used to be known as Giants Country, but now we're known as New York Giants on SI. So a little bit better branding, I think, for everybody. But Gene is here, and he's been doing a great job over on the site formerly known as Giants Country. Gene, we're going to talk about the Giants roster, the state of it, since it's been a while. Let's start off by basically, the 90-man roster is pretty much set. There might be a little tweaking here and there and whatnot, but when you look at this roster, what do you like about it most?
I like that there are, even though you hear a lot of fans say that it doesn't seem as if there's competition, I like that there are options, right? Even if you don't have a perception of competition, you do have options. There are options at tight end. It's pick your flavor. Do you want a blocker? Do you want a pass receiver? Do you want a guy who can give you a little bit of both? Do you want a guy who's movable? Do you want a sedentary inline piece? There are options there. Look at the wide receivers. There are options. You want a big body guy. You want a small shifty guy. You want a big guy in the slot. You want a guy who can burn down the field. You want a guy who works underneath the intermediate. You've got all the options. I think that this is probably the most options that I've seen this team have in probably 6 years, if I'm being honest. Even on the offensive line, people are like, oh, well, they should go ahead and put Illuminor on right tackle. Well, you've got Evan Neal. What are you going to do with him if you don't put him at right tackle? Illuminor has reps at offensive guard. They need help at offensive guard, but then that also means there's competition, because now do you want the Illuminors, do you want the Runyons who are more pass blocking guards, or do you want to go with your Azudus, that are more of your run type of blocking guards? You have options. I don't think they've had options before. I like the fact that there's more options now.
And with that, you mentioned competition, and I was just thinking about it as I was writing up some stuff for the site formerly known as Giants Country. They have, you mentioned Evan Neal, who the first couple of years of his career not really challenged. He was kind of like assumed that he would be the starting right tackle, and now he's got sort of, Jermaine Illuminor kind of to push him a little bit. You've got Drew Lock now, who's going to push Daniel Jones a little bit. You have guys pushing each other, and, coaches always say, oh, we like competition across the board, but there are very few spots on this Giants team, Dexter Lawrence being one, Bobby Okereke being another, Andrew Thomas, that you can honestly say there is no competition for those guys' jobs.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There are only, I would say there is one person at every level that you can say there's no competition for the job, right? I think everywhere else there are questions. And well, I think maybe the defensive line as a whole might be the most set outside of maybe the who's going to play the 3 technique, right? Like who's going to be the regular rotational guy at 3 technique. You know that you're going to have Kayvon on one side and you're going to have Burns on the other side. You know you're going to have Dexter Lawrence in the middle. It's who's going to play next to Dexter Lawrence. Like that's the question. But everywhere else, right? Everywhere else, you've got one guy and then a bunch of question marks. And you've got a lot of different pieces that you can plug in and plug out to say, hey, this guy could fit in if, or this guy can fit in if. I will say this. I'm holding the Tyrod Taylor, bandwagon, flag, but I still contend that they had competition for Daniel Jones the last 2 years. They chose to give the job to Daniel Jones. It wasn't like he just went out and won it. I remember specifically before that 2022 season, Tyrod Taylor outplayed him in training camp. Like it was clear Tyrod Taylor was making plays. He was dynamic. And I remember the rhetoric coming out was, well, Daniel Jones, we wanted him to feel adversity. I think you had heard some of the similar stuff. We wanted him to feel as if, he was getting pushed and he responded well. And then he went out and had a pretty darn good year. So maybe letting him be comfortable in 2023, like outside of the injuries, I don't know. 2024, people think Drew Lock is somebody who can come in and push him. I don't actually feel that way because I don't think Drew Lock's better than Tyrod Taylor. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But everywhere else, there's definitely competition out there.
Now, Gene, when you look at this roster, where are they still a little iffy, if you will, at whether it be at a position group or an individual or whatever?
I think right now the question mark is definitely at linebacker for me. Like we know Bobby Okereke is there. I'm not sold on anybody else next to him. I know what we saw last year. That was cute. But when I look at the film, there are a lot of missed tackles by Micah McFadden. There are a lot of times where he just gets swallowed up by offensive linemen. Does the new scheme help that? Having an extra defensive lineman up there, taking away the ability for an offensive lineman to climb. Will that help? Will he get better? Can he become a better tackler? I'm not sure. Behind him, you've got Isaiah Simmons, who is still we don't know what he's going to be in this type of defense type of player. And then you have a Darian Beavers who's coming off of a year where he wasn't really thought of much after a year where he was injured. So, like, there's a lot of questions there, and I don't have an answer. I think that's one of the places that's going to be really intriguing to watch during training camp, how that unfolds. It's easy to say, well, Michael McFadden, he started last year and blah, blah, blah. But when you look at that film, and I know the defensive coordinator is looking at that film and going, man, he missed a lot of tackles. I mean, a lot of tackles where he had his hands on a body and that body kept going. Not like he took a bad angle or, he misjudged it. No, he just flat out missed the tackle. And so that has to be addressed. And if it's still the same type of situation where he just doesn't have enough lead in his pencil to get a guy down, then you're going to have to look, and go a different way. And what's that different way? We don't know it.
Jeannie, since you ventured on to the defense, I know you've been doing film study for the site formerly known as Giants Country. You've been looking at, different players, how they might fit into this defensive scheme. We know one of the basic differences is going to be less man coverage, a little bit more zone coverage. We know that, Shane Bowen doesn't really like to do a lot of exotic blitzes the way Wink Martindale did, that he's more about the 7-man front getting to the quarterback. This change in the defensive scheme, who do you think some of the players are going to really benefit from the change?
Number one player that'll benefit is Kayvon Thibodeau. My only beef with Wink Martindale, the only beef anyone should have with Wink Martindale as defensive coordinator of the New York Giants, is that Kayvon Thibodeau spent entirely way too much time dropping into coverage when he was your only viable pass rusher from the edge. Like, you didn't have an Aziz because he was hurt or he was not fully 100%. You had nobody else. Ward was not really an edge rusher like that. Boogie Basham, you'll see in my write-up on New York Giants on that side that he's just not a guy who is a fast twitch guy on the edge, but could work better in a four-man front. Kayvon Thibodeau needed to be pass rushing every single time there was a potential pass to be thrown. And a lot of those times he was dropping back covering air because they were doing zone blitzes with them and all of these exotics. And sometimes you can just be too exotic. And I think that was one of the places where he didn't get his just due. It's why his numbers are lower than what you would expect a high first round draft pick to be, because he just didn't have as many bites at the apple. I expect him to be a rush all the time kind of guy this year, and I think that's going to help him. I expect to see him in double digits easy this year, because he's not going to have to face double teams and chips like he had to face last year, because that's going to be on the other side with Brian Burns and on the inside with Dexter Lawrence.
All right, coming up next, more with Coach Gene Clemons of New York Giants on SI. Don't go anywhere, folks. Hey, Giant fans, with the dead period coming up in the NFL calendar, I'm really looking forward to catching some shows and concerts in the area. And no matter what I end up choosing, I never have to worry about being shut out thanks to Game Time. With Game Time, there are always great seats available at competitive prices right up until the start of the event and even after. Game Time offers last-minute deals that can save you even more, and they take away the guesswork that comes with the buying experience. Game Time offers clear seat views and event cancellation protection. Plus, if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, joined by Coach Gene Clemons. Yes, he is a football coach, hence why we call him Coach, out of respect for his knowledge of the game. And of course, Gene Clemons is the host of Talk Spicy podcast, which you can find on YouTube. And you can find his written work over on New York Giants on SI. I got to get used to that.
New York Giants on SI.
The site formerly known as Giants Country. But anyway, folks, coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast, the Giants have OTA number five today, Thursday. So I will have for you, of course, a complete rundown of what went on, what was said. We're going to hear from the offensive assistants. So I'm sure new offensive line coach Carmen Brasillo is going to be a very popular draw, if you will. So looking forward to that. And Gene, since we're talking about offensive line, let's go back to that unit a little bit. You know, last year, the offensive line, we know, wasn't very good. Injuries were a big part of it. But the tight ends also, I think, were part of it. I think, you know, we can probably make a case that the running backs didn't really help the cause too. When you look at this new unit, you know, we don't know the definite set lineup yet. We can guess, but how much do you think the tight ends are going to be more involved in in helping this line, or maybe are they going to be not as involved given the upgrades that have been made?
Well, hopefully they're not involved, because if your tight end is involved in pass blocking, then that means you have less receivers out, you know, in the pattern. And less receivers out in the pattern means more defenders to guard less receivers. That's just not a recipe for really spreading the field so that you can take advantage of open spaces like they like to do. It's not indicative for a lot of movement, which is what a Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka offense likes to do. So you would hope that the tight ends are not involved. I think that where we saw the lack of blocking happen is twofold. Number one, lots of injuries, right? Lots of injuries, people trying to play through injuries. Then the injury now taking somebody from one position that they haven't really been practicing to another position that they have to play in a game. Lack of continuity, lack of understanding of techniques when it comes to what you're doing in a particular play or on a particular blocking scheme. So if you just get consistency from the 5 people that were supposed to have started last year, I think you would have a better offensive line than you had last year. But when you now add in the additions of Illuminor and of Runyon as guards who are good pass blocking guards, if the pass protection was the issue on a regular basis, then guess what? Pass protection is going to get a lot better, right? Because a lot of the leaks that we were seeing were coming up the middle. I know that people want to bag on Evan Neal on the right side and say he gave up, X, Y, Z. But if you look at the film, there's a lot of times where people hit the B gap and the A gap and were able to put pressure right on the quarterback, right in his face, which is the worst place that a quarterback wants to get pressure from. They can handle outside pressure. They can't handle the pressure up in their face. So if they have indeed improved on the pass blocking on the inside, then I think that makes the entire offensive line better. You have a second-year center who will now be a lot more comfortable in his job. He should have hit the weight room a little bit heavier because he's still a smaller dude, but he thinks the game through. You're going to have a healthy left tackle. You're going to have a healthy right tackle. A right tackle that's coming into his 3rd year with what everyone is saying is an upgraded offensive line coach. So you should start seeing some of the fruits of these changes that they've made and hopefully the continuity of guys playing more.
Gina, I want to talk about the receivers now for a moment, because at the top of the show, you talked about how the Giants have options. Malik Neighbors, I think everybody thinks, guy could take the top off of a defense. Allen Robinson was brought in. He's kind of a bigger slot, which now gives some options, to mix it up with a smaller Wan'Dale Robinson. When you look at the receivers that they have, the projected group here, how do you kind of see the distribution and the responsibility shaking out amongst these guys?
I think the first thing that we have to do is we need to temper expectations from Malik Neighbors. It's like the wide receivers that come into the league as rookies and tear it up, they normally have well-established pass games that they come into. They usually don't come into situations where there's a bunch of like unknown variables. But I'll say this. If Malik Neighbors is able to get the same number of targets as, let's say Darius
Slayton.
Darius Slayton was able to get over the last few years, he's going to put up very similar numbers. Like, we have to understand, Darius Slayton was the de facto wide receiver 1 on his team. He never received 100 targets. So unless the Giants are planning on changing their philosophy, which they could be, which is why they were okay saying goodbye to Saquon Barkley, which is why they brought in 2 more pass protection type of guards, maybe they're deciding that they want to put the ball in the air a little bit more than they've put it in the past few years. And if that's the case, and you're going to give Malik Neighbors 125, 130 targets, which is on the low end of what elite level receivers are getting, then you're probably going to get good production from him. But if you're going to give him Darius Slayton targets, then you're going to probably get Darius Slayton production, because for all intents and purposes, Darius Slayton is very explosive. So I think when you talk about distribution, they have to be careful to not try to force feed the ball to Malik Neighbors because they want to prove the point that he was worth like a 6th pick. And then like Badam going all over the place with these other weapons. I think it needs to kind of open itself up naturally, where Daniel Jones is just going to whomever the open player is. And then you'll have a couple of plays that are just designed to go to Malik Neighbors or designed to go to Wan'Dale Robinson, or you're going to take a shot deep with a Jalen Hyatt or a Darius Slayton or Malik Neighbors. I think that's probably, for me, the most exciting thing to watch is when they decide they want to go, like when they decided they want to go 4 verts, like who's the defense that's sticking with those guys, right? Because you got Jalen Hyatt and you got Darius Slayton, who we know we've seen him year after year take the top off. We've seen Jalen Hyatt get behind defenses easy, and we know what Malik Neighbors was able to do in college, and that level of speed and explosiveness should transition into the NFL well. You've got 3 guys that can blow the top off, and then you've got a couple of guys underneath who work really well. I think that that's an exciting thing to see this offense. So it's like, let's take the shots where the shots are. Let's make sure that Daniel Jones doesn't hold the ball too long and wait until the guy's already 50 yards down the field. Instead, when he sees him, throw him open. We've seen him do it at times, but not as much as we'd like to. And then, distribute the ball to the receivers on design plays that are supposed to go to him. I think that's the way you will see the distribution go. I expect to see Neighbors get the most targets, and then probably a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, because of how he can be used, will probably end up with the second most targets, close to probably where Darius Slayton is, if Darius Slayton's even on this roster by the time we get to the beginning of the year.
Can't see why he wouldn't be, at least not right away at any rate. What does Daniel Jones need to do to keep his job other than obviously win? I mean, there's a lot of debate, does he need to hit certain numbers? What do you think he needs to show besides staying healthy and winning to keep his job?
Well, in 2022, we said he had to hit certain numbers. He didn't hit those numbers. He kept his job and got a $40 million raise. So I don't know if numbers are going to play a role. I do think it's going to be hard for him to keep this job, full stop. It's going to be hard for him to keep this job. Just the economics doesn't make sense. You've got him for this year. Last year, he'll be on the last year of his contract. If you bring a rookie in and you draft a rookie next year to pair with him, you have him on the last year of his deal. You've got a rookie ready to just take over. You're not going to come back in and double back in for the production that you've gotten from Daniel Jones for $50 million, because that'll be the going rate by the time we get to another 2 years. It'll be $50+ million. Is Daniel Jones going to be okay taking a pay cut from what he's getting paid now on a per year basis in another 2 years? Probably not. He's going to want that final bite at the apple that he could possibly get as a starter in this league. I just don't think it's going to work out financially for Daniel Jones to be here when you couple that with what he's going to do production-wise. Now, saying all that, if he goes out there and he all of a sudden becomes Aaron Rodgers, then we'll have a new discussion. But outside of him all of a sudden catapulting himself into the top 10, like a legitimate top 10, not like the top 10 we tried to put him in when it was 2022 and he had a decent season, but like a real legitimate top 10 where you look at him and you go, there's not 9 quarterbacks better than what he's playing right now. He's probably not getting another contract. So ride out these 2 years, be ready for a new guy in 2025 to be on the team and possibly taking over in 2026, if not halfway through 2025, if the season goes awry.
Brian Daboll hasn't made any announcements yet, but it sure does look like he's going to take over the play calling. How much do you think that might help Daniel Jones?
Hard to say. I don't think that Brian Daboll was a mastermind at Buffalo. I think Brian Daboll had a big, athletic, like raw piece of clay that they leaned into what he did well. And even to that, had real flaws when it came to clutch winning time. It wasn't just on him. It was on some of those schemes. How do you get into the playoffs? You've been running the ball well for for weeks on weeks on weeks. You got into the playoffs and then forgot how to run the ball. Your running backs didn't get the ball at all. Like this has been a consistent issue with Brian Daboll. So him taking over the play calling, to me, just goes, you're giving yourself one less excuse. So when people start saying it's time to move on from Brian Daboll, you can't say, well, I haven't been calling the plays. Now you've taken that off the board, and you took it off the board super quick because there was no reason to throw Kafka under the bus for last year. You could have just chopped up last year to a mountain of injuries that derailed your offense. You didn't have to throw Kafka under the bus. Now taking over the offensive play calling duties means that I'm saying, without saying, hey, I was not happy with what Kafka did as offensive coordinator. Well, that was your choice. You brought him in. You made him offensive coordinator. And then in less than 2 years, you got him out of there as offensive coordinator. So, or as a play caller. So it all then goes laser focused right back on you, Brian Daboll. What are you going to do? And if it's what you did in Buffalo, we know that had a ceiling on it. And you got out before the ceiling was exposed. That's it. Like, you were able to cash your chips in before the ceiling got exposed, but there was a ceiling on it, and they have yet to go past that ceiling since he's been gone.
Interesting take on that. All right, coming up next, more with Coach Gene Clemons as we talk Giants, where the roster is, where it's headed, and a lot more. Don't go anywhere. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, with Coach Gene Clemons. And again, don't forget to tune in. We're going to have the wrap-up of the next OTA, which is open to the media. I will be there. I'll have media takeaways, practice takeaways, all the good stuff. I'll get that show together and out to you just as soon as I can. And we'll send you, of course, into the weekend, hopefully on a good note. It's always fun to talk football, actual football, and get a chance to see it. So I'm looking forward to it. And speaking of football, we're continuing our conversation with Coach Gene Clemons of New York Giants on SI. And Gene, see, I got it right this time. You say it enough times and you'll get it.
Yeah.
Gene, you look at this roster, another area I don't think we're talking a lot about, and we probably should, are the upgrades that they have made on special teams. They brought in a guy, Matthew Adams, who, a lot of people are like, who's that? And you go back and you do some research on him. And I, of course, wrote his profile up for New York Giants on SI. And this is a special teams team. And you look at some of the other guys they brought back, Carter Coughlin, who they initially were going to move on from, it looked like, and they brought in a few other guys. I mean, special teams is so hard to predict, but given what you've seen, the guys they brought in, the guys who can do double duty, play either offense, defense, and special teams, do you like the direction that unit's headed?
Absolutely. I thought it was a smart move to bring back Carter Coughlin and Cam Brown. Cam
Brown.
He didn't come back. I'm sorry. But to bring back Carter Coughlin, I thought they should have brought back Cam Brown. Long athletic, rangy football players. Like, that's the name of the game on special teams, right? Carter Coughlin's a guy who works hard. You've already mentioned one. I did the write-up on Boykin, who I think is poised to have a breakout special teams year. Maybe even propel himself into a Matthew Slater-like position where he is a perennial stalwart on the team as a special teamer. I think the one thing we have to understand is that not everybody in this, in the NFL, can be a starter, and not everybody in the NFL can play on the offensive or the defensive side of the ball. There's just not enough snaps in the game. But special teams is important. So when you get former third-round picks who were expected to be contributing wide receivers who are willing to humble themselves and kind of transform themselves into special teams aces, that's different. That's big. And guys like that are hard to find, right? I likened Boykin to Shepard when Shepard was here, and the way in which he was able to kind of go away from being a former number 1 overall recruit in college as a quarterback to then becoming like a gadget player in college to then get into the NFL and being a special teamer and making his bones as a special teamer. And so when he was with the Giants for those 2 years, and he was a stalwart. He was always making plays on the special teams, but not as like a returner, as a gunner, as a blocker on that second line. Those are where you need those guys. And with the new kickoff rules, we're going to talk about that a lot. With the new kickoff rules, if you're not blocking well on that kickoff return team, you're really giving up an opportunity for an offensive play. And so putting those guys who are athletic enough, who are long enough, who are rangy enough, who are strong enough to be able to do multiple things, play on the line on the kickoff and punt return, to play on the line or be a gunner on a kickoff team and a punt team, that's going to be big. And so when you look at the 2 tight ends that they brought in, Manhurts and Stahl, both play special teams, right? You look at some of the receivers that they brought in. We already talked about Boyd can play special teams. But what that also means is that some of these guys who don't play special teams, they're on the bubble to make this roster. It's going to be harder for an Allen Robinson to make the roster because of Miles Boykin is going to take a spot as a special teamer, right? But he's also a receiver. It's going to be harder for his name's jumping out my head right now. The tight end.
Cager?
Yes, it's going to be harder for Lawrence Cager, right, to make the team as a special teamer because these other people exist, and these other 2 tight ends who also are much better blockers on offense also do things on special teams as well. So like when you start to do the math on these things and you say there's only so many spots for players, the guys who bring an extra boost to the special teams, they're going to get the nod. I love re-signing Olshansky. I don't know if I said his name right.
Olszewski, yeah.
Olszewski. I love the re-signing of Olszewski, but I also think Tyrone Tracy Jr., that's going to be his role early, is to be a returner type player, especially on kickoff returns. So like when you start to do the numbers, they start to dwindle really quickly, and those guys who are bringing added value on special teams are definitely going to be the ones that get the looks first.
Gene, earlier in the program, I asked you about concerns on the roster. You mentioned linebacker. You didn't mention defensive backs, particularly cornerback 2. Are you confident that Cordell Flott is a fit for what they want to do in this scheme, or do you have some concerns about that cornerback 2 spot?
I wouldn't say I'm confident. I'm going to say that the Giants are confident, right? Like at the end of the day, we have to take them in their evaluation. They brought him in. It seems now to me to be very strategic in the way in which they do it. If you think a guy's ready to play, but you have another guy who's a proven commodity at a position, what do you do to get them more reps? You move them inside. You still got Darnay Holmes, who's he's a better nickel corner than Cordell Flott. I don't understand why people kept trying to get Darnay Holmes out of the position, but he's a better nickel corner. Why? Because he is more physical than Cordell Flott is. He just knows how to play in the box better. When we saw Cordell Flott in space, he was great. So now we put him back in space. So now you move on from Adoree Jackson. His contract's up. You got him off the books. You've got a guy to slide right into that spot, and he's been getting reps. So now you're not moving someone into a spot cold. You're moving somebody into a spot who's been able to get real game time action, who's been in the thick of it, who knows how it goes, and who has had to guard some of the most elite wide receivers in the game, because a lot of those elite wide receivers are playing in the slot now, right? So if he can guard them in the slot, he can guard them outside. And so I think they feel good about him outside, and that's why we haven't seen any moves for a legitimate veteran starter at that position. I think they're going to give him every chance to be the guy, and if he's not the guy, then they'll make that move from there.
Gene, when you look at this roster, obviously they've got to do better than 6-11. What do you think is the biggest X factor for this team moving forward?
It's going to be how they execute in the short to intermediate passing game. I think that's going to be their bread and butter, because I don't care what these people keep saying, unless Daniel Jones becomes a brand new Daniel Jones that just cuts it loose, he's not going 1-2 throw it like Tyrod Taylor was. Like, you could see Tyrod Taylor pre-snap, he's got what he sees, he catches it 1-2, it's gone. That's not who Daniel Jones is. At least it's not who he's been. And you can even see it as he's been going through these OTAs, and they're showing like clips of him like going through his progressions. There was one time where Neighbors was flying, and I'm saying, throw it. I got through 3 throws before he finally threw the ball. And I'm like, that's not going to work. That doesn't work in real football. That only works with the T-shirts and the helmets on. That doesn't work with the jerseys and the pads on and the whistles. So they're going to, because he excels at the short to intermediate game, especially those intermediate cross the middle passes. That's his bread and butter. So I think they're going to lean into what he does well. I think he's going to come back really strong. I think he's going to come back really healthy. I think he's going to still be a threat to run the ball and give you something in that part of his game. But I think they'll make their bones on that short to intermediate, pull the defense in, and now set up the deep passes over the top that way, instead of going deep to try to spread them out to hit them underneath. I think it'll be them pulling people closer to the line of scrimmage and then going over the top when somebody foolishly thinks that they can run with Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, and Jalen Hyatt one-on-one on a deep pass, which they just can't.
All right, final question for you, Gene. You know, a lot of expectations of the rookies. Malik Neighbors, we talked about. Tyler Nubin, the 2nd-round draft pick. We didn't really talk about him, but it's kind of, thought that he may push for a starting job. But when you look at this entire rookie class, what's realistic to expect from each member?
I think this is just my opinion, but I think if you're a first, second, or third round pick, you should be pushing for a starting job. Those are starting caliber draft slots. You should be getting starting caliber players there. So either you should be starting or you should be pushing an incumbent starter, right? So I expect to see Drew Phillips pushing for the nickel job. I expect to see Nubin starting, and I expect to see Malik Neighbors performing, right? Like, I think that's what needs to happen in order for them to look at this rookie class right now and go, okay, they're on the right track. The added bonus is if you get something out of Theo Johnson this year. I think he's 1 year away. I think he's a lot rawer than people give him credit for. There's a reason why he only had so many catches at Penn State. There's a reason why he didn't go higher. When you look at him, he looks like he should be a first-round draft pick. He has a first-round draft pick body. There's the production doesn't say first-round draft pick. It says he's got some work to do. And so, like, I think anything you get from him as a complimentary piece is going to be a plus, right? But then in 2025, he should be ready to go. The same way that I felt about, the same way I felt about all of the tight ends that they've had, when they've come through here. But I think that first, second, and third round pick, those guys should be ready to go or close to ready to go right now. And then I think a guy like Tracy Jr. is a guy who's so raw as a running back. His immediate impact needs to be on special teams as he continues to get better with learning the position.
And what about Moasso?
I think I don't know if he's prepared for the NFL with how spread out the game is, right? I think he's probably more of a box guy, right? So I don't know if he's ready for it. I think he might need another mango season. Maybe a guy who is an immediate special teamer who can help in that capacity and spell guys. But I can't see him gaining reps over the guys that are already there right now. I don't see him jumping anybody.
Yeah, if nothing else, special teams or
Yeah.
maybe even practice squad, nothing, when you get to sixth, seventh round, those guys are, you're kind of taking flyers on those guys at that point. So,
Unless you found the jewel that dropped for some other reason than what he's done on the field. But I think a lot of those guys have talent, and it just all depends on the type of defense they go into, whether it fits their skill set or not. I think if you're going to play a 4-man front, one of those things is your linebackers better be able to cover. And so I don't see him being in coverage a lot. We know Okereke is not coming off the field, because he's one of the best linebackers in the game. I can't wait to do his GGU. Like, he had such a phenomenal year, in my opinion. He might be one to look at as numbers taking a step back in this new defense, because with a 4-man front and with the talk being that they're going to rely on the 4 men for the pressure, you won't see as much of him blitzing as you saw last year, which I thought he did really, really well. And so maybe that's a part of the wrinkle that they throw in with the Giants, to give him an opportunity to still seek the quarterback. But I wouldn't be surprised if he spends more time in coverage this year than he did last year, which he spent a lot of time in coverage last year too.
And he did pretty well at it.
He's great at it. I think right now, Bobby Okereke is probably a top 5 to 8 linebacker in this game.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. He got snubbed last year, I thought, for postseason honors that he should have gotten, but
it's a deep position, unfortunately. Like, there's a lot of really good linebackers, and then there are linebackers who have just a better name. Like, they're known more, so they kind of get the push. But I think it's similar to Dexter Lawrence. Like, Dexter Lawrence's performance and his accolades came a year after the performance got better, right?
Yeah.
Like, he was really good, and then that next year when he was really good again, that's when they gave him the nod and stamped him as who he should have been. Kind of similar with Andrew Thomas as well. That second year, he really took off, didn't really get the accolades as we would like to see him get, and then in year 3, all the accolades came.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also winning helps too. A lot of times, the award voters, they look at who's on the winning teams and they go with those guys. And, it's an uphill battle if you're not on a winning team. But, you're absolutely right. Bobby Okereke, very, very underrated player. And probably, next to Dexter Lawrence, probably like you're talking the top 2 guys on that defense, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think they've got 4 guys who I think they could start anywhere on anybody's team, right? Yeah. I think both of your edge rushers, whatever you want to call them now, could start on anybody's team. I think Okereke could, and I think Lawrence could, but definitely, in most important positions, Mike linebacker on the defense, defensive tackle on the defense, edge rusher on the defense. I think the Giants have it sewn up now.
Fingers crossed. I mean, we need a better season this year. So, all right, Coach Gene, appreciate you coming on as always. Thank you, Giant fans, for tuning in. Don't forget, we've got one more episode this week. It'll be the OTA number 5 wrap-up. We will have, of course, plenty of content for you here on the Locked On Giants podcast, as well as New York Giants on SI. Find our written work at si.com/NFL/Giants. We're currently doing training camp player profiles. So there's no excuse to say, who is that when we mention a name on the program or anything like that, because we all got you covered. Coach Gene's contributing, Brandon Olson, myself, got a bunch of people contributing, and they're doing a great job so far. You've got to check these out. These are probably the best group that we have done in all the years we've been doing this. So anyway, that'll do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, click the little notification bell so that you're notified every time we post a new video. And we will see you again tomorrow, Giant fans. Thank you.